Hello. Hello, everybody. It's now May the 9th. We're studying Parshat Emor this week, which is one of our really interesting parshiot. We're not going to get too far into this parsha um, because this parsha is going to we're going to focus on primarily the second part of the parsha, not the first part. We're going to veer away from items relating to the Kohanim, uh, but just to make the broadest recapitulation of the first part of the parsha, the Kohanim, these are rules relating to relationships of the Kohanim, proper function of the Kohanim. This is specific rules regarding their function, obviously because they play such an important role within the sanctuary. They run the apparatus for it. They have to do that, and so there are certain requirements for them, both in terms of their own personal um, physical characteristics and their relationships, who they marry, etc. How and precautions that they need to exercise in order to refrain from coming into contact with impurity, as all Kohanim know. And this makes for a very interesting discussion in terms of how these practices transmit themselves throughout the generations, to the extent that even to this day, Kohanim practice certain kinds of restrictions, especially when it relates to funerals, cemeteries, and the like, and around death. Um, it makes for an interesting set of problems if the rabbi is a Kohen. Rabbi Miodanik at Avasachem is a Kohen, and so therefore uh, the practice at Avasachem is when there are funerals, and most funerals do take place in the synagogue, um, that he is not in the same enclosure when the body is brought into the synagogue, and others have had those circumstances. It's a very fascinating idea, but alas, we are not going to deal with that. Instead, what I'd like to deal with is the the second major portion of Parshat Emor, which um, has become very significant to me, only in the sense that it highlights the question of the calendar and what is going on in the calendar, and why this is such an important focus of this the parsha, but also the book. It's quite a substantial portion. We could ask to what extent these texts play a role within Jewish practice, Jewish law. That certainly is important. But in light of this as a calendar, we need to ask a question that I'm going to hold in abeyance right now: is what is the significance of that? And and how is that significant? And just to give you as pedagogically, just to kind of dangle out the suspense. So I'm doing that with regard to this. This book came out a couple of years ago, 2020. It won the Yad Vashem Book of the Year award. Fascinating examination, scholarly analysis of wartime calendars, and we're going to look at some of that at the end of this. So, first, I want to talk about the text, and uh, we will look at that presently. Here we go. The text. Okay. So the calendar. Just a second. Here we go. It starts in chapter 23 of Leviticus. I read it in Hebrew. Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, daber al bnei Israel, ve'amarta lehem, moadei Adonai, asher tikru otam mikrai kodesh, elehem moadai. This is a verse that we recognize because we read it at the festivals in addition to the regular Torah cycle, but we just read this passage during Passover. Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, the appointed times of Adonai, which you are to proclaim to them as proclamations of holiness. They are, these are they, my appointed times. The English I took out of the Everett Fox translation, made it as literal as possible to see how on the one hand, we really can't convey what the Hebrew is trying to say precisely, but there is a kind of terseness in the Hebrew. Moadei Adonai, asher tikruotam mikrai kodesh, elehem moadei Adonai. The festivals of God, that you call them Mikrae Kodesh, which we would say, we call them festivals, but Mikrae Kodesh, the word means that which is called holy. So we'll talk about that in a second. Elehem Moadai, these are my festivals, my seasons, my appointed times. So we have a couple of concepts here, a couple of words really. Moed, which is an appointed time. Mikra'e Kodesh, Kodesh being holy, Mikra, that which is called, and then of course Moed, okay? And then it goes straight into this. Sheshet Yamim Te'aseh Melacha, Uvayom HaShvi'i Shabbat Shabbaton Mikra Kodesh, Bo Melacha Lo Ta'asu Shabbat Hi Ladunai B'chol Moshotechem. 6 days, te'aseh melacha, it's not you shall do work, but which would be ta'aseh melacha, it's te'aseh melacha, work shall be done, work may be done. Uvayom hashvi'i, on the 7th day, Shabbat Shabbaton Mikra Kodesh, Sabbath ceasing. That's how he translates the word Shabbaton, Sabbath ceasing. Mikra Kodesh, a proclamation of holiness. Kol melacha, lo ta'asu, all work, do not do. Sabbath to God in all your settlements. Okay? So these verses may seem to us to be quite elementary, but what I want to do is put a magnifying glass over them. You know, what do you learn when you place this text under a magnifying glass? Right? We can say these texts, and this is part of what is enjoyable about the study of Torah is that we uh, are familiar with these texts through the regular recitation of them. But sometimes when you look at them closely or look at them from a different angle or put them in a different context, you learn things that you never knew before. And I think that's the joy of study. The joy is it's a question that I'm always trying to drive with is there something new I can learn here? Is there a way to look at this that really haven't looked before? And so I'm going to try and answer those questions by putting these two verses under the magnifying glasses, and see if I can get a concept. Okay. So Daber el Bnei Israel is a concept. Speak to the children of Israel. The concept is that the calendar belongs to the people. I mentioned this in last week's Parsha Kedoshim, Kol Adat Bnei Israel, that the holiness laws are spoken to the entire people of Israel. We don't appreciate this deeply because we absolutely take for granted the fact that we have so much access to all of the material. I'll just close the screen for a second just to pull everybody up here. We have our access to the material is such that every single person has access to every single thing that's ever written, right? And that while mastery is something that you attain through prolonged periods of study, according to Malcolm Gladwell, it's like 10,000 hours. You need 10,000 hours to have proficiency, right? And you know what he says about practicing a musical instrument or any activity. Um, and that probably is true for textual study as well. Notwithstanding that, the fact that every single one of us has access to this material online, or it used to be you went to libraries or you owned a significant collection of books yourself so that you could access this. So it's available. It's available to everybody. And what we don't appreciate is that in antiquity, religious communities were established through different orders and elites. And so the elite basically held on to the secret information, or uh, I guess the elite had access to the sacred. That's not exactly that is the case in terms of the ancient structure of the temple. Only the Kohanim have access to the Holy of Holies. Only the Kohen Gadol really has access to the Holy of Holies. But the idea is that it's to pulsate to everybody, and that the community itself has access to the holy, not by entering into a holy space, but by living according to the sacred law. And if you live according to the sacred law and practice according to that and define your life by that rhythm, you are no less holy than the holy, than the Kohen Gadol. And so the idea that holidays, or that the calendar is something that belongs to everyone, is a concept that emerges already from this verse. So go back to it, which is Daber al Bnei Israel, belongs to the people of Israel. Moadei Adonai. So I have a second concept here, that there are God's appointed times. So, and here, why would it use this term that there are appointed times of God? Something called Moadei Adonai, as opposed to, say, Moadei Adam, times appointed by people, as opposed to, say, times appointed by other gods. And this, I think, is significant. So you have the term Moadei Adonai, which means that these belong to God. What is a Moed Adam? I mean, that concept doesn't exist in the Torah, but it's easy to see. You don't have to just it's like Bible quiz, questions. Are there any events demarcated by a human life in the Torah? Let's see if you can come up with any kind of Moedei Adam, any human times. This is a hard question. Let me give you a hint. The story of Joseph. I'll give you another hint. Uh, uh, when Joseph is in prison with the baker and the what's that, Marlene?
The wine steward who forgets.
Right. And so,
And then
okay, so in that little story, there's a tiny little piece of trivia, which is a human time, which is that when Joseph interprets the dream, he says, Be'od shloshet yamim, in 3 days, Yisafaro et oshcha me'alecha, Pharaoh will raise your head again. He will elevate you again. Okay, and that's he effectively will return the winekeeper to his post, and then for the baker, Bo'od shloshet yamim yisa roshcha, he's going to execute you, and then it says Vayi b'yom hashlishi yom huledet paro. It's Pharaoh's birthday. In the Torah, I don't know of any other character who gets his birthday marked. And the fact that it's Pharaoh's birthday means it's a national holiday. And the
What
story.
about a child being weaned?
I'm sorry?
What about a child being weaned?
The child being weaned is also a festival, right? and it would be a personal celebration. I had that in mind. Thank you. Um, and it's a Moed Adam. It's a personal festival. But here in the context of sacred days, I mean, even in the United States of America, we observe the birthdays of presidents. Washington's birthday is a holiday. Lincoln's birthday is a holiday. Martin Luther King's birthday is a holiday. And you would ask yourself, well, why would these days be holidays? And the answer is obvious. These are days that these individuals were important to the nation, and therefore to commemorate these days is to commemorate a part of the national narrative. These are days appointed by human beings because they're part of the civil, I guess it would be the civic calendar of the United States, days which would reckon meaning to people. And it's interesting, and not to be controversial, but with regard to Martin Luther King Day, that's a fairly recent holiday. And you can all recall some of the debate around that day, whether or not there should be that day, what would constitute that day, and what's the reason for that. And under the surface, are which communities observe and how that day is observed. I'll give you another example, on a different vein, which is 9/11, which of course is seared into our minds, and it's part of our living memory. Barely 20 years ago, 21, and 9/11 was not declared a national day of commemoration. Um, for lots and lots of reasons, I guess.
Negative.
But commemorations do take place on that day. So there was not an attempt to condense around that date other kinds of national meanings. Ilana, you had a question, I think. Go ahead. You have to unmute. Unmute. Turn your microphone. Go ahead. I need to put your microphone on.
Okay.
Now go ahead. Yeah.
Not about celebrations of certain days, but it's mentioned many times in the Bible that Vahi Bashana ha blank
Yes.
of somebody ruling, being a king, or being, so there are some points that are leading towards calendars.
Absolutely, and that's a very good point. And one of the best examples in the book of Esther, in the third year of his reign. So, typically in modern calendars or pre whatever, the calendar is oriented around the reign of the king. It's in the fifth year of the third year of his reign. When the king dies and a new king is inaugurated, it's a whole shifting of time, right? And I have no doubt, that in the world in which Vayikra 23 emerges, that's how you tell time. You tell time on the basis of not of God, and that's very significant. I'm glad you raised the point. You're telling time in reference to human beings, and so Moadei Adonai is actually a theological statement. That's a theme that we'll see carried out in the rest of what I'm saying today. Marlene, you have your hand up. Yeah.
I wonder about the language. It says Moadei Adonai, God's holiday, as opposed to my holidays.
Exactly.
Tell the children that it's my holiday.
Well, so the way I'm going to answer that, the way I try to answer it is saying it arouses in me opposition, the sense of the bifurcation of the world. That is to say, the world is divided, and this is like the Bible's view of the world, okay? God, everything else, okay? And as you've heard me say many times, that I guess the plot of the Torah is somewhere we meet, somewhere there's a meeting of God and humanity. So back in Exodus, it was at Mount Sinai. But here, it's a different kind of world. The meaning takes place in time. It's very hard to, it's a very abstract concept. I meet God in time. Well, how do you meet God in time? You meet God in time through making time sacred and living in God's time, which is very different from human time. Human time, as we see, is organized around the reign of a certain individual, around the reign of certain other gods. This is important because each god in the ancient world has a certain kingdom and a certain, jurisdiction over both space and time. Follow-up question? Yeah, go ahead.
But on all the rest of the times he says, and I took you out of Egypt because I am the Lord.
Yes.
And I took you and I did this. And now it's my holiday or it's the holiday of God.
Hold that question for a second because I'm going to answer it in concept 4. Okay? So first, I said the first concept is that basically the democratization of the calendar belongs to everybody. Second is that these are God's events, Mikrai Kod, Ele Moadai, these are mine, as opposed to human beings or as opposed to gods. Number 3, Asher Tikruota Mikrai Kodesh, which you declare sacred times, you are to declare them sacred occasions. And Mikra'e Kodesh, which has come to mean like, a holiday, but Mikra'e from the word Mikra, which means, and that's from Kara, which is to call. So Mikra is that which is called. So, to be kind of trivial, I would say, I am sitting on a chair. The reason why it's a chair is because I have designated a furniture. So it's a mikra rahit, if you would go that far. I have designated it as such. So the item that the holiday is something that is proclaimed. And so there is a human role in God's holy time. And then these are Elehem Moadai, these are my sacred times. A sacred occasion derives its sacredness from the act of declaration. So this is my answer to you, Marlene, which is, yes, you're absolutely right. God is the one that he's saying these are mine, but there's a role for human beings in God's festivals, and that is that they have to declare them. And this, I think, is this is the whole thesis. The whole book here is, so what is the human role in determining time? And you can see that this is such a powerful idea, because how we understand time is really, a way of saying how do we understand ourselves. So if God is saying these are my times, these are my holy times, my appointed times, it's saying to the people, you are living on my calendar. I am ordaining the calendar, and you're living in my time, which is different. If you think about the world of the slaved or the enslaved, in whose world do the enslaved live? The enslaved live in the world of the despot's time, the enslaver's time, which is, by the way, why something like this, the creation of calendars during the Holocaust, has taken on such a significant role, because even the act, as we'll see, even the act of trying to structure time is itself an act of rebellion. It's an act of resistance. I mean, this author he doesn't make that the central point, but it's part of a matrix of ideas that within the structuring of time is the declaration of authority and the declaration of allegiance. Okay, and that ought to be obvious to us just if we just examine it again, using the fact that we as Jews, live in a bifocal time. This is the term that this author uses. I'm not sure I would, I think of bifocals as, lenses, but it's, in a way, it's, I would say more like we live in a split screen, because, I don't have my calendar in front of me. I have it on my screen, because, the shul calendar that we distribute. The shul calendar, or any Jewish calendar, is a bifocal calendar. Why? The months are the Gregorian months. We have basically acquiesced to the secular structure of time in the fact that today is May 9th. I didn't, when I started out the class, I said today is May 9th. I didn't say today is the 8th of ER, okay? Which I should have said. I should have said, in another way, what's that?
23
It's
23rd
ER,
of the counting of the Omer.
the 23rd day of the counting order, right? So we are day 23 of the counting order. So we've by saying even that, we give another layer of timekeeping to locating ourselves in time. So today is the 8th day of the 8th day of ER in the year 5782, which incidentally we're still part of a century, right? He makes the point that we're still part of the century of the Holocaust in Jewish time. Okay, so but we also say today is May 9th, 2022, and I mean I don't have to give you a whole lecture on this, but even though those are secular terms, what are they from? Well, they're not. The year is arises out of the religious context of Christianity, and the Gregorian month names are names in accordance with the some sacred elements of the calendar. The point is that by locating ourselves in this system, we are saying we are part of God's world. And God's world is not the world he created only in space, but it's the world that he created in time also. So Moadei Adonai is I am connected by understanding the rhythms of time, not as the detached rhythms of nature having its own forces, but the direct imprinting of the divine gives me access to the divine. Now, it's very important to understand, and I'll get to this in a second, that not all cultures understood time in this way. But before that, I just want to see if there are any other reactions to that. I'll just go put the concept stuff. So my four concepts basically out of that verse is that these are for the people. They are God's times. You declare them time, which means that you have a role in this, and that the sacredness is basically a combination of God and human beings. Or in the case of Israel, God and Israel. Israel, it's like the tree and it's like, right. Does it exist as a holy time? Well, apart from the people. The only way it exists as a holy time is if the people declare it as a holy time. And we'll look at that concept in a second. But two hands here. We have Steve, Barbara, and Bob. So go ahead, Steve, Barbara. Steve?
Okay. It's
Steve. I need to see your video, unless you don't want to show us. Go ahead.
Okay. So I just was listening to one of the series of Meir Soloveichik.
Yes.
He told an interesting story. In fact, I think this was yesterday or the day before. An army rabbi, now I've forgotten his name, was a rabbi at Buchenwald.
Yes.
And he came across a rabbi from Europe who was very frail. And he tells a story that after the rabbi died in the United States, his son found among his papers scraps of paper with the Hebrew calendar on it.
Yeah.
That the rabbi had been getting scraps of paper and a pencil, and he kept his own calendar in Buchenwald and wherever else he was. because that was how important the Hebrew calendar was to him. I thought it was a
Right.
kind of
So Meir Soloveichik basically read this book. Okay. No, seriously, the book, is now percolating into different circles, and it talks about the keeping of calendars as an active, and we'll talk about that at the end. Go ahead, Bob. Yeah.
Do you have any comments or the rabbis about calendars that are solar based, calendars that are lunar based, or in Judaism where it's both?
So my only comment, it's not a comment, but it's a shared observation in that as even though I'm trying to present this from the Bible's perspective, it's obvious that cultures that preceded the Bible had to have their own understanding of time. Time is universal in the sense that we all experience time, and that different cultures counted time differently, and that the common historical understanding is that our derivation of the frame of time is based on the Babylonian system. Okay, let me jump to that for a second, and here we'll go to this part. You anticipated some of mine. This I took out of I got this from a different source. This is the website livescience.com, and he says the 7-day week originates from the calendar of the Babylonians, which in turn is based on a Sumerian calendar dated to 21st century BC. 7 days corresponds to the time it takes for a moon to transition between each phase, full, waning half, new, and waxing half. Because the moon cycle is 29.53 days long, the Babylonians would insert 1 or 2 days into the final week of each month. That itself is a fascinating thing. So we don't. It's like as human beings, we live. It would be so interesting to do the kind of time travel and to just imagine ourselves back in that era when you counted time based on the observation of celestial phenomena. The most primary one is, well, the sun. The sun rises every day, and then there's the moon. Now, how much observation does it take to conclude that there is a regular rhythm to the cycle of time? If you live in climates where the seasons change, and if you're 5 years old, you've already lived through 5 winters and 5 summers, and you understand this thing already without having to articulate it. So if wisdom accumulates that seasons come and seasons go, and people learn how to prepare for it, and they rely on the regularity of it, that of course imprints itself onto human culture. Okay, so this is the culture within which the Bible and biblical culture emerges. There's timekeeping. Of course, people are keeping time. That's just people are keeping time because they're people. It's how they shape time and how they understand time. So, do they understand time by the sun, or do they understand time by the moon? And the traditional Jewish answer is, well, of course it's lunar, right? Of course it's lunar, right? But that is an anachronism that projects itself way back into the Bible. It's probably both, even in the Bible. Certainly, the cycle of the moon is the more dominant cycle, but they understood the yearly cycle as well. They get in the Bible, in the Torah, everything is counted according to the lunar month, and that, of course, leaves its imprint on Judaism. But it's not a foregone conclusion. And then, of course, the problem, and we'll see this is articulated elsewhere, the problem that we have in the calendar is synchronizing both the lunar month to a uniform number of days, and the lunar year within the solar year. So when the peculiarity of Earth's place in the solar system is that while it's 365.25 days to rotate around the sun, that almost corresponds to 12 lunar months, except for the fact that you're out of sync by 11. Okay, because 12 times 29 and a half is 354. So every year you're off by 11 days, which is why in Judaism you have the intercalation of a month 7 out of every 19 years, an additional month to bring it in sync. And why in Islam, for example, which doesn't have this system, Islam has a floating month. So Ramadan, which was just terminated, last week, concluded, in the spring. Next year, Ramadan is going to be, I guess it would be 11 days earlier. It would be already, around Purim time. So, what we have, it's fascinating to understand this, that every, 12 or so years, you have the conversions of Ramadan, Passover, and Easter, which when you think about it, now we're just a week or two removed from that, the fact that it wasn't as combustible as it was, I mean, it was combustible in Israel, but the fact that it didn't erupt into a full-blown volcanic eruption, I think is a dayenu. It's something to be thankful for. Okay. Steve, another question?
Just a point. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, they found documents from the Essenes, who were probably also Sadducees, who wanted to change the calendar to a solar calendar, probably under pressure or being impressed by the Greeks.
Yeah.
And there was a big controversy, and I think it also came out in the Talmud.
So yeah.
There is a calendar. That's a solar calendar.
Certainly, what I would say to abstract from that is that the discussions of the calendar and what gets on the calendar and how the calendar is, that's already a question of politics too. It's what's in charge, who determines time, right? And that's a fascinating question. The Romans here, I'm going to go back to this again. Romans also inherited.
Yeah, Rabbi, there's also one other.
Go ahead.
The famous discussion in the Talmud about when the Omer starts.
Yes.
But that's kind of a little different because they couldn't agree on what Shabbat means.
All of that is true, and debates about time, are really debates about authority. Okay. Romans also inherited the system from Babylonian tradition, though they didn't begin using it until the instatement of the Julian calendar in the 1st century BC. Up until this point, the Romans had used the nundinal cycle, a system they inherited from the Etruscans. This was a market cycle of 8 days, labeled A through H. On market day, country folk would come to the city, and city dwellers would buy 8 days' worth of groceries. By the time the 7-day week was officially adopted by Constantine in 321, the nundinal cycle had fallen use. So lest you think that the 7-day cycle is something that everyone accepted, no, there was an 8-day cycle. And there was also a 10-day cycle. The Romans named it doesn't go into the 10-day cycle here, but here we go. The Romans named the days of the week after their gods and corresponded to the 5 known planets, plus the sun and the moon, which the Romans also considered planets. To this day, all Romance languages, mostly Spanish, French, and Italian, bear the mark of Roman day names, the exception being Sunday, which now translates as the Lord's Day, and Saturday. So these are the names of the days of the week, right? And, the Monday is the moon, Tuesday, Mars, Wednesday, Mercury, Thursday, Jupiter, Friday, Venus, Vendredi, Saturday, Saturday, Sunday, day of the sun in English, but day of the Lord in the other languages, okay? So it just begs the question, which is, well, how do Jews count time, and how do you count days of the week in Hebrew, right? What's the answer? Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni, Yom Shlishi, Yom Revi'i, Yom Chamishi, right? So why is that? And what would be the reason that would first occur to you as to why Jews count the days by ordinal numbers, or I guess, ordinal, first, second, third, as opposed to by the planets and their deities?
We're waiting for Shabbat.
We're not only waiting for Shabbat, but we're making a theological statement. Okay? the
By the
theological.
creation, maybe, by the creation.
So
Avoiding idolatry.
exactly, we're avoiding idolatry, and we are imprinting the story of creation onto our lives. Okay, so what the Wikipedia or Live Science is basically saying is, look, the calendar and the 7-day cycle predates the Bible. Okay, because it basically, and this is like the popular science of this, popular history, is that the Babylonians, they had 4 phases of the moon, and so that roughly made for 7 days, and that's why we have a 7-day cycle. Um, the Jews, though, borrowed from the Babylonians, and that's why, and the Jews gave the world the Bible, and the Bible imprinted itself onto world civilization through the 7-day cycle. Okay, but the Bible, as we are seeing and claim, is basically monotheizing the existent mythologies and recasting what people previously understand about the world, and recasting it in terms of, well, there's one God. There are no sub-gods, there's only one God. And if there's only one God, then that one God is the God of time. And what the Bible is basically saying in kind language is, the hell with the Babylonians. The hell with a pagan system that revolves around the moon. It has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with God and everything else. God ordains time, and this is how we structure the universe. We structure the universe based on what we perceive as the orders in creation, the orders in the natural world, and that God not only ordained matter in the natural world, but ordained time, to the extent that every single creature in the world, in the universe, now rests or ought to rest on the Sabbath. So that our observance of the Sabbath, of Shabbat, has within it a deep theological statement. That is, we are synchronizing ourselves through this rhythm with divine time. That's what's going on. Rob.
Are there commentaries also on critiques of other gods of time, like Kronos within Greek mythology and others? Because it's not just space, it's also time that can be idolatized.
So I don't know. That I'm not familiar with. I just haven't done that kind of reading. I can imagine that for those rabbis or those who had that contact, who had enough contact with the world to know how it was governed, that there would certainly be a reaction to that. I have no doubt that would be the case. Okay. All right. So what we have then is a statement about time. I just want to go back to the second verse here, which is Sheshet Yamim Te'aseh Melacha v'Yom HaShvi Shabbat Shabbaton Mikra Kodesh Kol Melacha Lo Ta'asu Shabbat Hi L'Adonai B'Chol Moshoteim. So that the first item in the calendar is Shabbat. Now Shabbat is not given a date, and the reason is, of course, because Shabbat occurs every 7 days. All right, but Shabbat is fundamental. Shabbat is fundamental. So in the first item in the calendar is Shabbat, which means that the primary element of structuring time, and I would add, the primary focus for a Jew in structuring time is Shabbat. Okay, this plays itself out in the daily life of a Jew, because we are always saying Hayom Yom Shabbat, Hayom Yom Rishon b'Shabbat. In the daily prayers, we are saying this is the first day of the Shabbat-oriented week, basically the Shabbat unit. When we pray in the morning, we recite Psalms. The Monday Psalm, the Sunday, Monday, Tuesday Psalm. This is Hayom Yom Rishon b'Shabbat, Hayom Yom Sheni b'Shabbat. Okay, so our primary focus, our primary structure is Shabbat. and this kind of this shapes Jewish folk culture in the sense that every day of the week you orient yourself towards Shabbat. So on Saturday you have Shabbat, right? And Sunday is Saturday night is Motza'ei Shabbat, when Shabbat goes out. Yom Rishon, on Sunday you're already looking towards Shabbat. So on Yom Rishon, I'm laughing only because the question would be to both an observant and maybe not an observant Jew is, what are you doing next Shabbat? Okay, what's your plan for Shabbat? And the question I would ask, just as an anecdotal question, is at what point in the course of your week do you make your Shabbat plans? Some make their plans already on Sunday, like Yom Rishon, and some, make their plans, later on in the week. I find, for myself, I'm already thinking about Shabbat. Certainly, I have the opportunity because of this class to think about next Shabbat already on Sunday. I'm already thinking about what to teach, yesterday. So I'm orienting my mind intellectually, conceptually to the Parsha already on the first day of the week. Okay, that's particularly Jewish, and you would expect no less from your rabbi. Okay, so but at what point do I plan the menu? At what point do I do the shopping? At what point do I make the food? At what point, and so I have found that people who are quite exceptional at organizing their lives in general are quite exceptional at organizing Shabbat. I want to just remember Anne Glatt, Zichrona Livracha. I always thought of Anne as someone who ought to give a master class in Shabbat organization, because our banter and our conversation in the office used to be like, she already had it all. She, by Friday afternoon, everything was made, everything was done, and she could relax and do, and bring Shabbat in a state of relative calm and equanimity. Whereas for many of us, including myself, that's not what it looks like. Okay, we're often so busy during the week and so occupied that we don't have the opportunity to do all the preparation or the facility or the skill or just whatever, the wherewithal. So we end up right to the last minute, and that's part of a different kind of rhythm. But I'm so happy when Shabbat comes, because no matter what's been done or what hasn't been done, it's Shabbat, and that's that. And that's the point, is that it's the rhythm of our lives, okay? So, and it's the primary rhythm of our lives. It's not, there's an understanding here that the day, of course, is the day, but the primary unit of time is Shabbat. I would go so far to say that there's a reason why, for example, we sit Shiva, because 7 itself is a primary unit, and that organizes our lives. Second concept here is that there's a cycle, 6 days of work and the 7th day ceasing. The names of the days are not given, no, because there is an understanding that the days are not the planets, okay, and the days do not belong to anybody but God, okay. But the assumption Sheshet Yamim Te'aseh Melacha is work, okay. Who declared Shabbat holy? This is the only day that is not a mikra, that you do. Ela mikra kodesh asher tikru otam, says the first verse, right? I'll go back to it. I'm sorry. Ela modet tikru otam mikra kodesh, sheshet imitaseh Shabbat Shabbaton mikra kodesh. Who declared it? You didn't declare it. God declared it. So Shabbat stands outside of the other festivals, because Shabbat is the thing that's declared by God, okay? Now, God did declare, that on the 15th day of the month of Nisan, you should be, but you have to structure your lives. You have to, there has to be a whole apparatus to maintain that, because of certain things that happen. But Shabbat happens independently of an apparatus, is what it's saying. It belongs to God, okay? I'm going to go back to my concepts here. Mikra Kodesh, fourth, Kol Melacha Lo Tasu. Why the need to state this? Well, as a logical conclusion, it is not explicit. That is to say, you 7 days, 6 days you work doesn't necessarily mean that on the seventh day you don't have to work. So it's making it explicit that the single most differentiating element of this day is that you do not work. And Shabbat, it belongs to God, but does it belong to man? And the answer is yes, of course. And this is really important. Shabbat is not dependent on place, on any specific place, nor is it dependent on the land. It's dependent on wherever you are. And here, this means that the desert community is already observing Shabbat from its inception, already from Mount Sinai alone. It's observing Shabbat, or at least ideally, in the idealized world, it is. Okay. So we have the why is 7-day week. We did that. Okay, and it is a theological statement. I want to digress now and ask, what happens if you don't know what day Shabbat is? Okay, the rabbis take this question. It's a fascinating discussion. Fascinating. Amar Rav Huna, Hayam alech baderech. Guy's walking on the way. O bamidbar. Maybe he's in the desert. Ve'ino yodei matay Shabbat, and he's lost all track of time. He does not know what day of the week it is. Okay. I could ask every single one of us whether or not you've had that experience if you don't know what day of the week it is, and you all say, "Of course I do." Whether it's in the aftermath of trauma, or whether it's because of an operation, or whether it's because of whatever reason is, some days you wake up and you go, "What day is it today?" You can lose track of time, and how critical it is to keep track of time. What do you do in terms of Shabbat? So he says, "Eno yodea matay Shabbat," doesn't know what time. Moneh shisha yamim umishamer yom echad. Rav Huna says, from the moment that you made a mention of, I don't know what day it is, that's day one. Okay, so you have to find a way to remember that this is day one. People would remember in certain ways. They would tie a knot, they would write something down, or they would collect a stone. However way you made a time, you start from day one is the day I remember that I forgot. Okay? Fascinating. Rabbi Chia bar Rav Omer, Mishamer Yom Echad, on the day that he remembers, that's his Shabbat. And then he counts 6 days. Okay, see the difference here? One says, I remember, okay, day one, in 6 days, it's going to be Shabbat. The other rabbi says, day one, I remember, I got to make Shabbat today. And then he counts 6 days. So what's the difference? B'mai kamifalgi. What's their different opinion? Mar savar kivriyato shel olam. One sage reckoned his counting as an analog to the creation story, and one sage, Mar savar kadam harishon, he reckoned his counting on the basis of the first man. I think this is such a stunning debate. It's such a great debate. How do you reckon time? Do you reckon time as an analog to God, or as an analog to the first creature? Okay? So before I give you the answer, what do you think is the answer? What do you think that how the halakha decides? Because it is a halakha question, which is if I don't have a calendar, forgot the day, what's my Shabbos? What do you think it is? Go ahead, Alana.
For me, I need 6 days to prepare for Shabbat. If I know that today is Shabbat, but I'm not ready, I'm not prepared, I didn't do shopping, I didn't cook, I didn't clean, I didn't whatever.
So if you forgot what day it is, you're saying this is day one and I have 6 days. And in 6 days I have Shabbat. Okay? Good. Anybody else? Anybody take the other opinion? So Elon, I want to tell you, the halakha supports your decision.
Oh.
and it's fascinating that the halakha veers in that way. It's while it affirms the dignity of being a human being, of course, it wants to focus on aspiring to be like God and to be part of God's rhythm. And that what it's saying is that the main narrative that goes on in the weekly cycle is imitatio Dei, is the imitation of God. Okay? It is to be able to imitate God. Okay? I want to just bring up a couple of comments. So The text is trying to teach us that the basic unit of human time is Shabbat, or the week, the necessity to live on a divine human rhythm, the centrality of timekeeping and the centrality of calendar keeping. Okay? Here, I want to just give you a couple of quotes. Calendar reckoning is not just a technical pursuit, it is fundamental to social interaction and communal life. The calendar provides an essential point of reference for interpersonal relations and time-bound communal activity. It determines how time is lived and utilized in the community and sometimes shapes the community's distinctive identity. The calendar is also a way of conceptualizing the dimension of time and hence of making sense of an important facet of human lived experience. Calendars are significant to social. This is from Sasha Stern. He's an important scholar. I have a whole lecture of his queued up, but we don't have time for it. He is, but basically saying, look, what he's saying is that, first of all, the calendar is so essential to shaping your identity. It's fundamental in terms of our understanding of time. But in his study, he's saying that as you would probably guess, there's a history to the way that we do that. Obviously, as we develop tools, both astronomically and mathematically, to count and to kind of observe reality, things have to change. And he shows in his scholarly work how the computation of the Jewish calendar emerges such that in the Bible it's one thing, in the Mishnah time of the Mishnah it's another thing, in the time of the early, the Talmudic, Amoraic period, it's another thing, and by the post-Talmudic era, already the calendar, by 8th or 9th century, the calendar assumes a shape that more or less looks like how it is fixed to this very day. So the fixing of the Jewish calendar happens around the 8th or 9th century, okay? And that there's a shift from both the calendar is determined based on the witnessing of the cycles of the moon. Well, that's not scientific, right? Two guys can get up and say, I saw the crescent of the moon, and they are adjudicated in a court, and that then becomes the declaration of the court, and therefore it's a new moon. That's how they told time. That's not terribly efficient. But once you observe, it's Ptolemy who observes that the regular cycle of the moon. Once you know that time, you can calculate what's called the molad, when the new crescent of the moon appears, and then you can work that very easily. That is to say, simply by arithmetic, you can calculate when the months are going to be. Okay, I want to do another text here, and then I want to just show you some examples of the Holocaust calendar. Elisha Karlbach, important historian now at Columbia University, or Princeton, I think. One of our congregants, their child is going to study with her for a PhD, Nessia Nelkin. One of the most crucial cultural monuments a human society can create is a system of accounting for time. Although calendars may appear to be simply a convenient way to coordinate human movements with natural time, every culture has developed its own mechanisms for doing so. The history of calendar computation through the ages and cultures is a story of the need to balance the cycles built into nature, circadian, day and night, lunar, and seasonal, winter and summer, with those that have purely human meaning but no natural corollary, such as feast and fast days, weeks, or the division of the day into hours. Creating this manifold system has never been a uniform or self-evident proposition. The year of the sun and the revolutions of the moon do not calculate to whole days, but are completed with fractions of days. Every society has thus had to confront the question of whether, when, and how to align the dissonant circuits of the heavenly bodies by adding days, months, hours, or even seconds. Their cyclical motions have no fixed beginning point. This too is arbitrary and differs by culture and tradition. The reckoning of time thus has always employed a combination of astronomical and mathematical science, along with cultural and religious interpretations. Each generation of calendar writers reshaped the system they inherited in ways that reflected both historical meaning as well as advances in available technology. So what she's saying, it's a very dense way of saying it, is that here's nature and here's human culture, okay? And we observe time within natural rhythms, the daily rhythm, the monthly rhythm, the annual rhythm, and yet we impose in those cycles ways to mark time and to shape our identity and to shape our understanding of who we are. And that is through the creation of instruments known as calendars in order to mark time. Okay, calendars are cultural monuments, experiences that helps us understand God, our place in the world, our relationship with God, and our role in the world. So I'm at the, in a way of conclusion, I say, what questions is Leviticus trying to answer? The questions that it is trying to answer, they are, well, how do we structure time? What's the meaning of the way that we structure time? We structure time around the idea of holiness and being connected to God. We didn't even go into the calendar per se, but the items that are listed in the calendar, namely the holidays, the festivals of Passover, Shavuot, Sukkot, Passover, Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. They function along a calendar, but they are the appointed times. You declare them as times, and they have woven into them a narrative, the historical narrative of the Jewish people, which we, of course, later understand. When we tell the calendar, we talk about the calendar as representing the narrative of the Jews in, from the Exodus through their arrival in the Promised Land. That is, Passover represents Exodus. The Shavuot technically represents the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. Sukkot represents the symbolic dwelling places the people of Israel lived in the desert. In between, you have Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, both the kind of, the cycle of time related to Mount Sinai and the declarations, and those are complicated stories altogether. The point is that they tell a story of holiness. I just want to end with I want to dip in. I want to show you a bit of this lecture, just because he's got beautiful illustrations of these texts. Sorry, always takes a second to get the proper screen up. Okay, good. Here we go. These are. But a few are surprisingly large. The majority. I'm just going to. He's got a wonderful lecture here. This is Professor Alan Rosen. But these are examples of Holocaust calendars. People who, I would say they risked their lives in the creation of calendars. In one extraordinary case, Jewish calendar was superimposed on a pocket-sized printed Gregorian calendar that was already 4 years out of date. Okay, it's a fascinating. In the left, here's another calendar. Here, I'm just here's another example of a calendar. This is the calendar that was produced in the Lodz ghetto. Okay, and here is Theresienstadt calendar, and you see. And in analyzing the calendars, he's trying to show what is encoded in both the pictures and in the dates themselves. I'll give you an example. So this is Kever Rachel. Why did they choose Kever Rachel? This is basically a printing of an illustration that was fairly common from pre-state Israel. This is from 1942. And the picture of the Bezalel picture of Kever Rachel was pretty widely distributed. But notice, does he have here? He doesn't. No, he makes a point of the fact that some of the fast days are not listed because fasting would have been too difficult for the people at that time. Okay, let me give you another example, or maybe he has it in here. Here we go. So this is the calendar. Notice that Av, okay? So Rosh Chodesh Av, 1, 5 is Shabbat, Varim, and this is the candlelighting time for Theresienstadt. You imagine how difficult this would have been to compile this information. And then the 9th of Av. So he makes a point that it's left blank here. So it's left to us, to the viewer and the person who would have held a calendar this way, to say, well, why did he leave the 9th of Av blank? So his conjecture is that you know, to impose upon the inmates of Theresienstadt the obligation to fast on the 9th day would have been excessively cruel. If I ever meet him, I want to kind of debate this idea, or at least have a discussion with him and say, you know, there is something about leaving Tisha B'Av blank that not only is about saying we're not going to fast this day, but there's a kind of like, there's a subtle objection here, which is, it's so, you know, we're so deprived we can't fast, we have to survive. It's dafka now, we have to not fast, right? You tell?
If this was in Theresienstadt, how did it get typed?
They had typewriters. He had a typewriter.
So the people in the camp, or did they have somebody else?
In fact, he says the person who made this, I don't have the name of the guy, but he has the name of him. The person who created this calendar had access to a typewriter. In Theresienstadt, which was unusual, was, you know, of all the camps, you know, unusual in the sense that people had materials. You know, as scant as they were, there were some materials because the Nazis had created Theresienstadt to be a kind of model camp. Even though people were starving and dying, you know, this is where they brought the Red Cross. And, you know, I have to do more reading on Theresienstadt because, you know, the fact that the Red Cross was so blind to the deprivations only tells you see what you want to see. You know, you have a confirmational bias when you do an investigation. You know, they couldn't see that the people were amazing. They couldn't see that the Nazis were trying to fool them. Of course, you know, I mean, but it was convenient because if you make the claim that they are, you know, doing something, you know, illegal, then you run into confrontation. It's you know, this is an idea that's playing itself out in real time now in Russia. Okay, I want to go show you a different. This is an artist's rendition of the names, and you can't really see it on this, but Tevet, it's interesting, she has snow-capped, you know, letters here for Tevet. Adar, a concealed message of Purim for Theresienstadt people, you know, and underneath the arrow here is a picture of a pelican which is about fertility and maternity and watching over. So concealed in this is encoded a message of resistance, okay? And then here's another example of a calendar, handwritten calendar, more details of all the different kinds of things and how important it was to create time. And notice, of course, that there's a bifocal nature to Jewish timekeeping that already existed, you know, for hundreds of years. The secular dates in the left and the Jewish dates on the right, okay? And then this one here, this is an Auschwitz calendar, and this one, another calendar. It's and with this, he has a long discussion, and that's his conclusion. The point is that the creation of calendars as tools of identity remains to this very day a very, very, I mean, today we celebrate this kind of culture of creation, and you know, we raise money off of it, we send it out, it's a gift, etc. You know, calendars are very commonplace, and they are incredibly useful tools. One of the ways I thought, you know, teaching the class is saying, okay, so does anybody know when, you know, when is Rosh Hashanah next year? When is Pesach next year? When is Yom HaAtzmaut next year? I know when Yom HaAtzmaut is next year. It's April 26th. Because it's my mother's birthday, right? But you know, it's the 5th of Iyar. You know, but the point is, we are always orienting ourselves not necessarily within Jewish time. You know, our joke is, you know, when are the holidays? Are the holidays earlier or late next year? The holidays are on time, right? They're always on time to our reckoning, okay? and but Pesach, actually, no, Pesach is not late next year. Rosh Hashanah this year, quote unquote, is late because it's at the end of September, right? September
Because we
26th.
added the month.
Yeah, end of the month. We like Rosh Hashanah. The ideal Rosh Hashanah would be like September the 8th, 9th, 10th, kind of thing.
And it's still warm.
It's still warm, right? Okay, go ahead, Bob.
So my question is on a little bit less serious note, but this is a thought experiment, and some Jewish science fiction writers, I believe, have actually been playing with this. If you were the rabbi traveling with Captain Kirk on the Enterprise, or in fact with our own astronauts, and you were recreating what we've talked about today, either on the spaceship or on another planet, which is not within our solar system, are you basically saying that you would recreate the timeframes and contexts?
Well, it's not a fair. I mean, that question was in fact asked by Ilan Ramon. Ilan Ramon, the late Israeli astronaut who tragically died in the Challenger, well, not the Challenger, in the which one? Not the Challenger explosion, the other one. He asked when should he keep Shabbat on the shuttle. Not that he was a religious Jew, but he understood, and this was why he's such a precious, heroic figure in Israel, because he understood that when he was in space, he was representing the Jewish people, and he had with him, special artifacts, and he made Kiddush. There's a very moving video of Ilan Ramon reciting Kiddush, and so the question was asked of a number of rabbis, and the answer was, because Shabbat, the cycle of an orbit is, Shabbat would be every 10 hours, basically, because you made 7 revolutions of the Earth every, 10 hours. You can't keep Shabbat every 10 hours. So they ruled that he would bring in Shabbat based on the place of departure, namely Florida. And you'll scour the internet, you'll find Ilan Ramon asks for Shabbat, and you'll see that I had that page up. I don't think I have it on my desktop right this second. There's a picture of Ilan Ramon with the rabbi, with a Lubavitch rabbi. But the point is that Shabbat time is Earth time, okay? And so then now if you extrapolate to, well, how do you keep Shabbat on the moon? How do you keep Shabbat on Mars? I think that becomes a much more complicated question. And would we still want to keep Shabbat relative to the Earth, even though if we lived on Mars, our whole circadian rhythm would be much different? So it would be a very, I think for a few centuries still, it's going to be an academic discussion, because the idea of populating Mars is probably not well within any of our lifetimes or descendants of ours. But one day, who knows, there'll be Jews on Mars. And when there are Jews on Mars, they'll want to know how to keep Shabbos, right? And will they keep Shabbos in relative to Mars, and that will be a very important theological discussion, of course, as it should be. All right, I think we're done. We should go on. It's a fascinating topic, but we'll leave it there. As usual, Toda Rabah.